Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for today's performance anxiety panel. Today we have Emily. She is a mental performance coach, and we also have Alex, a clinical counselor with a focus for mental performance as well. So really excited for this. If you two just want to introduce yourself, give a little bit of background, and we'll go from there.
Cool. So, hey everyone, my name is Emily Cisternino. I'm a certified mental performance coach. So right now, I kind of have two different populations that I work with. So my full-time job, I work with the United States Army Special Operations Command. So I work with a special operations unit here in Savannah, Georgia. So I'm their sole mental performance coach. We're also called cognitive performance specialists. Really just focusing on how can we train our brains to help us optimize our performance from a physical perspective. So that's kind of my full-time job. And then I also have my own company, the Elite Mind Academy, with my co-owner Sam Brown, who can be here today. But we created that in 2020 to get back to working with athletes because we just love athletes. We still will always identify as being an athlete. And we love the motivation and just the vibe that you all bring. So love getting back to working with you all and kind of getting back to our roots. I was an athlete my whole life. I played softball, dabbled in some volleyball as well. And then when it came to college, I ended up hanging my cleats and focusing on school, kind of experienced some of this burnout, as I'm sure some of you have experienced sometime in your life. And then got back into coaching collegiately in grad school. So I've kind of been on both ends of the spectrum, which is a cool perspective to have, being on the field and off the field and coaching and mentoring as well. So that's just a little bit about me, but I'm really excited to be here. So thanks, guys.
Hi, everyone. My name's Alex Wulbecker-Smith, and I am a licensed professional clinical counselor, and I work for Premier Sports Psychology, which is based out of the Twin Cities area in Minnesota, excuse me. And a little bit about how I got into my role. So I first got my undergrad degree in physical therapy. I really thought that I wanted to be a physical therapist with a team. I was very active growing up. I was also a college athlete, and I just wanted to stay around the game as much as possible. But it wasn't until after I graduated that I was like, "Ooh, I don't know if this is really what I enjoy, what I like." I really was more drawn to the mental side of everything. So I actually went back and got my master's in sports psychology, and I fell in love with it. And I was like, this changes everything. I really wanted to be, it sounds cliche, but I really wanted to be the person that I didn't have in college. I had a rough transition into my college experience, being that big fish in a little pond in high school, and then being a very tiny fish in a big pond in college. I had a career-ending injury that mentally really impacted me, and I didn't really have any mental health or sport performance resources available to me at that time. So when I was able to go back and get not only my master's in sports psych, but also my counseling degree, I'm really, really excited and lucky that I get to work with athletes of all ages, all backgrounds, all sports, all the way from the little 8-year-olds all the way up to the Olympic level athletes. I do private practice, I do college counseling, I do groups, I do teams, I do workshops, trying to bridge some of the mental health stuff that we have going on, as well as the sport performance. So every day is very different. And I geek myself out. I'm like, oh, if only I knew what I knew now as a younger athlete or as a college athlete. So I'm excited to be here tonight to kind of talk about some things that I wish I knew, and hopefully that can all be helpful for you all tonight with your playing careers and beyond.
Awesome. Thank you. So for all the campus captains in here, like this is, tonight we want to use this as an opportunity for, sharing some of your struggles, and hopefully they can give some tips and tricks on maybe like their own experiences in the past and kind of how to work through that. So I think that we're all in this today for a reason. Like we all have had some of this anxiety, whether it's schoolwork, whether it's our sport, or even like going out with friends and having that you know, it's almost as if it's a performance when you're going out and in public with you know, whether it's at like a party or a get together or whatever that may be. So if somebody is, you know, struggling with, let's focus on like that athletic portion of it, um and you know, they're feeling really anxious, whether it's practice or competition, like what are some things that you might suggest, or if you've had that experience in the past, like how did you deal with it?
You want me to take this one first? Okay. Yeah, so if I'm working with someone who's experiencing performance anxiety, I first trying to understand how it's affecting their thoughts, their feelings, and their behaviors, because it looks and feels very different for each person. So though I might be working with lots of people who are coming in like, oh, I'm super anxious about this, or I'm super nervous about this, really identifying those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of like maybe focusing on, oh, I can't do this, I'm gonna make a mistake, which is really kind of growing that negative energy and the thought of like not wanting to make a mistake, but we're focused on making a mistake. And then the feelings, right? Am I feeling tense? Is my mouth dry? Are my hands sweaty? Am I less talkative? Am I avoiding people? Trying to understand, again, those feelings and those behaviors so they can start to recognize it. Because if we're not able to recognize it, we're not able to work on it. So I always talk about that first and foremost when people come to me with that.
Yeah, I think you killed it with that. I think the name of the game when it comes to performance anxiety is just self-awareness in the first place. Because just like Alex said, that we all, there's how many of us, like 33 people here, we all can experience anxiety in such vastly different ways. So whether that's from the physical standpoint or from the cognitive or the mental standpoint, just like Alex said, everything feeds off of each other. So if I'm experiencing this cognitive or mental anxiety, so having thoughts about possibly failing or the what ifs, or maybe I'm like time traveling into the past and thinking about past errors or mistakes or experiences that didn't go in my favor, that is probably upping the amount of physical anxiety that I'm experiencing. And also identifying a couple things. Number one, like normalizing that this is something that we've all dealt with at some point in our life, whether we've admitted it to other people or not. Performance anxiety or just anxiety within a different atmosphere and different types of environments is super common. I think I read a stat a little bit ago from anywhere from 30 to 60% of people will experience performance anxiety. So I think number one, normalizing it. I think that's really important when it comes to being aware of what's going on. And then also understanding that sometimes some anxiety or some of that physical or mental energy that we're experiencing, sometimes it could be helpful for different people or different performances. So really just being real with ourselves and asking ourselves the tough questions and being aware of like, hey, is the amount of mental chatter or physical energy that I'm experiencing, is it helpful in this moment or is it teetering on having too much? And is there something that I need to do to combat it? So yeah, I think self-awareness is a really huge component because we can't really regulate or do anything about it if we're not aware that it's occurring and how it's impacting us as an individual, and then specifically on the performance, on the behaviors, on the emotions, on the thoughts. Because at the end of the day, everything is related, everything's correlated. So we want to make sure that we're becoming aware of what's like really going on and what the impact of that is for us as just individuals and as human beings, and then also on the output or the quality of performance too.
Yeah, that's great. Like putting a name to it, right? Like saying what you're feeling and saying it out loud to yourself or to other people is great. And I think, yeah, self-awareness is awesome. Um, so Emily, I'm actually really curious about your like work specifically. Like, what are some of the challenges that, you know, somebody might face in your line of work? And like obviously we want to try to relate that back to athletics, but how do they kind of push through those things?
Yeah. It's so interesting. When I first got working with the military, I was so out of my element because I never worked with any service members before or special operators. Um, and at the end of the day, it's very similar. We're dealing with the same exact things. It's just instead of throwing a ball or shooting a basketball or whatever the case is, it's shooting a weapon or making sure that we can keep up our physical training to meet the standards of the organization. So um, one thing that just popped in my mind that I think is like super relatable is just like public speaking in general. So within the military, you have to go to what's called a promotion board in order to go to the next rank. So just like going to a job interview or having to give a presentation in a class that is important to get a good grade. Very similar types of things. So when it comes to performance anxiety, yeah, we can see that there's some detriments from a physical output, but also from the mental output too. Like sometimes if we're experiencing too much fight or flight, or experiencing this cognitive or physical anxiety, that messes with our ability to think clearly or focus on the present moment. Or recall information that we've been studying or that we've been practicing, or even just like being able to carry ourselves with confidence in any type of scenario. So there's a lot of translation when it comes to my line of work with military and athletics and just performing in general. So just how can we make sure that we have the most control possible over the output and the quality of that performance, whether that is within the athletic world, whether that's within scholastics, whether that is within tactical or military specific performances as well.
Awesome. And for those of you who like watch the mental health training with Dr. T and Dr. Barlow, like controlling the controllables is something that he talks about all the time. So I really like that. Alex, what about you? Like, what are some, common challenges that you see people facing like in your work?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Emily in saying that everyone experiences performance anxiety to a certain level, and being able to understand what that looks like and feels like for them is important. And I think something specific that I work with athletes is that fear of failure, which is where a lot of that performance anxiety comes from. Is I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to give up the game-winning hit or the game-winning goal or whatever it may be. And part of that is sport, right? Like failure is a big part of sport. So I work a lot on coming from the mindset of like a growth mindset to help with performance anxiety. So we're not setting these expectations of perfectionism or I have to be perfect in order for people to value me or in order for it to be a good game or a good swim meet, whatever it may be. So really adopting and helping manage the expectation that failure is supposed to happen, is inevitable, and that's a great way to learn and grow. So that anxiety of not doing well enough or that fear of making a mistake, I'm pretty direct in my work. I'm like, you're going to make a mistake. Like, that's the point. Like, no one's expecting you to be perfect. And if you are being perfect, I would challenge you that you're probably not giving your best effort because you're being hesitant, you're overthinking, and you're trying to be very calculated, where sometimes you just need to let your body take over, because most of you have been doing this for a very long time. And just like you don't think about, okay, in order to walk, I need to put my right foot forward, I need to put my left foot forward. You've been doing it. That's what your sport is about, like playing freely, having fun. So that fear of failure, and I also see sometimes that fear of success can also impact performance anxiety as well. So we talk about like, well, if I'm going to go out and get a PR, that's going to be expected of me every time. So then we have to break that down and kind of understand where that lies, in order to help that performance anxiety. Because I always say the goal is not to eliminate it, right? When people come in and they're like, Alex, eliminate my anxiety, eliminate my depression, whatever it may be, I'm like, I'm not the person for you then. Like, that is not possible, but I am going to help you to reduce it to something that's manageable so you can work through it, not around it. You can build better coping tools, because that's how we work through things. And that's how we're going to manage our performance anxiety better.
Awesome. And if you guys like have things to bounce off of each other, like go for it. This doesn't have to be like just me, asking questions. I'm just
You're
trying
doing
to
a
keep
great
it
job though, you know?
perfect. We did have somebody send me a question. So they're asking, how can we differentiate between normal or like pre-competition nerves or like those butterflies, right? Versus they said clinically significant sports performance anxiety. So, like, is there a difference between the two? And if so, where does that kind of turn the page?
Alex, do you want to take this one? It sounds like it might be more in your lane a little bit. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So yes, there is a difference. It's hard to distinguish. There's not like a clear like this is exactly this and this is exactly this, but Yerkes-Dodson law has a really good bell-shaped curve that indicates the levels of arousal of what's too much versus what's not enough. And just like we were originally saying earlier, we need to have some type of arousal, whether that's stress or whether that's anxiety, for us to be activated and ready to go. So having those butterflies, having that nervous energy that I like to really encourage people to channel to, like, this is my excitement because I care and I want to be here. We want to have a little bit of that. We can be a little shaky and then we kind of get loose. Getting coping tools, and usually when the coping tools are implemented, it can help bring some of that arousal level down. But where it becomes clinically significant and what we see from time to time is A, we're not aware of the situation, or B, we're not utilizing coping tools. Or we're just saying like, I'm fine, and we're not really. That's when we're getting the panic attacks, the anxiety attacks. I've worked with many athletes, and even I knew teammates in the past who would be throwing up before games because they'd be so nervous, where their just physical symptoms are really taking over. I've had people like gymnasts like balk in the middle of events, which we like, that's dangerous in almost any sport, but especially with gymnastics when we're throwing our bodies up into the air, balking or pausing, getting the twisties, those are all a little bit more on that end where it might be nice to sit down and talk to someone about it, kind of explore, because then it becomes a little bit of a safety concern of if we're putting ourselves into harm's way with doing what we're doing. So I'm not saying everyone's going to be doing that, but some of those more severe, like I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I'm isolating myself. Those are more of those symptoms where it's like, okay, this is more than just like normal nerves, which are normal. This might be something that we want to talk through, kind of better understand, and how we go about treating that, again, is very individual depending on those symptoms that are present.
Yeah, one thing too that I'm thinking about is I think a lot of the time when we're talking about the difference between nerves and anxiety or excitement, it's, and Andy, I think you hinted at this before you said it, that it's the label that we put on these emotions or these physical states that can sometimes make or break how much of it we're experiencing, right? So if I'm going into a competition or a performance and I'm feeling some of the butterflies in my stomach, I'm feeling maybe like a little shaky. If I'm telling myself like, oh, like you're anxious, like you're nervous right now, you're not going to do well, that could create this feedback loop of creating this like downward spiral of a thought process. So that one thought could lead to another worst case scenario thought, which could lead to another one, which can kind of heighten the amount of energy, arousal, physical stimulation that we're experiencing. Whereas if I'm experiencing the same exact thing, the butterflies in my stomach, maybe being a little bit shaky, but I'm labeling that as like what Alex said, like, hey, I'm excited for this. Like, I feel like this because I want to do well and I care. And if I wasn't feeling like this, there'd probably be some issues going on because maybe I didn't care as much as I could have or thought of. So if we're able to label what it is that we're experiencing and being like accurate and real with ourselves, and maybe even reinterpreting some of the physical sensations that we're experiencing. Like maybe the butterflies in my stomach are, just telling me that my body is preparing for a physical performance where I need to move fast, or I need to make sure that I'm not digesting my food in that moment because I have other important things to be focusing on. So having those types of thoughts and labeling our experiencing in a more productive way, that could also have a feedback effect. So those types of thoughts can lead to other productive thoughts that can lead to more helpful feelings or physical state. So I think that being aware of how we're thinking about the physical or mental activation that we're experiencing can also have big effects on, what happens next, and then ultimately, how am I performing, or how much control do I have over what it is that I'm actually doing.
Yeah, like that positive reframing is super, super important. I mean, even like in my normal like day job, I get anxious about different events that we're doing, whether it's like speaking or even like data entry. If I'm measuring somebody's blood pressure and like making sure I enter the right number into the system, like I get nervous with those things, but I do tell myself almost exactly what you said, Emily. It's because I care about, this person and what it means for their health. Yeah, so it's great. There was another question. Reagan asked, how can we help our teammates when they're having um, performance anxiety?
Sorry. No, I think that's a really great question. Especially in team sports. Like, we want to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success, but also our teammates. We want to make sure that we're setting them up for success and helping them out. And I really think a big thing to keep in mind is that just like we all experience anxiety or performance anxiety differently, we all will probably use different strategies or techniques to manage that anxiety or maintain composure. So I think one really important aspect to keep in mind is having open lines of communication and conversations with our teammates to see what it is that works for them. Because for some people, they want to be left alone because they have their go-to routine that helps them maintain that composure in the moment. Whereas other people, maybe they want to, talk it out and just like brain dump what's going on in between the ears out to somebody else so that they can bounce some of this energy off of another human being. So really having those conversations and saying like, hey, like, what works for you? Do you need me to sit here and just listen? Do you need me to remind you of a strategy that you've used in the past that works for you? Do you need me to leave you alone? What's going to best help you in this scenario? Because like, I'm here for you and I want to make sure that I'm helping you in the best way that I can. So open lines of communication also takes some a lot of awareness on your teammates' part as well to identify like, oh, I don't know what works for me. Like, I maybe haven't thought of that before. So I think that's a really big thing when it comes to identifying and then also helping your people.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with all of that. And a lot of what I get in addition to that is like, well, how do I talk to my teammates about it? How do I approach them? And I say, well, how would you want to be approached, right? Like, would you want someone to call out and be like, you look really anxious right now? Or like, why are you trembling? Right? Like, would that be comforting to you in that moment? Or maybe more of like a softer, gentle approach if you are feeling anxious, if you think maybe a teammate and you're not really sure, being able to just share your observations like, hey, like, I noticed, you tend to get a little bit quieter before games, before we're about to go play. Like, how are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help? Just to start the conversation, I think is really important. I know, especially when I was in college, I would get severe performance anxiety. Like, I didn't want to make a mistake. I was really in my head. And not many times did someone ever say anything, not putting the blame on them. But sometimes I'd be like, I'm freaking out over here. Like, is no one realizing? Like, I'm freaking out. And I just want someone to be like, are you okay? And I could be like, no, I'm not actually. And sometimes just acknowledging it can be like, oh, okay. Well, like, I'm not hiding it as well as I thought, but someone else noticed. Right. And that felt good and validating. So being able to have like a gentle approach, you all know your teammates best of how that would be, probably one-on-one on the side, whatever, again, that looks like, of just asking like, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Am I seeing this correct? And sometimes they're going to be like, no, like, I'm good. Like, okay, like, just wanted to check in. Or other times it might lead to that open communication, like Emily mentioned, of being able to say, hey, do you want a reminder? This is what works for me. And again, just starting that conversation, you never know where it could go.
I can just also add to that, I think timing is something to really consider as well. Because if this is the first time you're having this conversation or that you're approaching a teammate, And you care, right? That's why we're having this conversation. But if the first time you're having this convo is in the middle of a competition or in the middle of a game, maybe that might not be the best time. If that's the only time, then okay. And what I'm getting at is maybe it's having these conversations kind of offline or at practice or something like that, so that it's how can we come up with a game plan? Like when I notice this in you, so maybe it's looking like physically looking anxious, or maybe it's visibly looking upset or whatever. When I see this, then what do you want me to do about it? How can I best assist you? How can I best help you in those moments, so that it's not adding to some of that anxiety? Because maybe in the moment, even though you might have the best approach possible, maybe that individual, your teammate, is going to get even more anxious or more in their heads because other people are noticing, or because they don't know how to combat it. So for sure, second everything Alex said. I think that's awesome. And I also think that timing is pretty important to consider in those types of conversations as well.
Yeah, like how you do it and when you do it, definitely very, very important. We've actually had a lot of great questions in the chat. So if you guys continue to have questions, please put them in the chat. We might not be able to get to all of them today, but I could also send them over to Emily and Alex, and I'm sure they'd be happy to type up a little email or something like that afterwards. But Taylor asked, when you have tried a lot of different like coping strategies and some different therapy methods, but you still feel like it's at a point where it's affecting you, and it's kind of like negatively affecting you, like it's almost too much of that excitement or arousal that you were mentioning before, Alex. Like, what can we do as a next step if we're still struggling and we feel like we've tried a couple of different things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a couple different things. I think if someone is consistently, whether it's showing up for sport performance or therapy, they're trying different things and really exploring like what's working and why, what's not working and why. But the anxiety is still pretty prevalent. I usually then have conversations about potential medication, adding that as the best form of treatment for just generalized anxiety is a combination of therapy and medication. So I come from that approach of let's try some behavior changes, let's try some coping strategies first. Like medication is not a one size fits all for everyone or just a magic pill that solves everything. But I use that analogy of, if you're swimming in the middle of the ocean and the shore is 200 yards away and someone gives you a life vest, that's like the pill, that's the medicine, right? It's not going to swim you to shore, but it's going to help you because you're still going to have to kick your feet, you're still going to have to move your arms, but that's going to help you do it a little bit more efficiently. And I found that when people do combine the medication with therapy, they're able to then access the tools that they have that they knew, but they weren't really able to use efficiently because something just was not clicking. And then they're able to be like, oh, wow, like that actually maybe helped or worked. And sometimes it's frustrating. Medication, again, is a personal decision and not for everyone. But it is something that I, at that point, would encourage an athlete to talk to their primary care or their sports doc about. There's lots of different types of medication, different dosages, different brands. And sometimes it's a very frustrating experience trying to find that right fit. But when people do, it's like, oh my gosh, like this is what it's supposed to feel like. Like I can actually use all these tools and they're helping in different ways. And it's a game changer for a lot of people at that point.
Yeah, I think also that's huge, right? We have to identify like what is this line, and when we start crossing that line, what are the appropriate resources in order to manage whatever it is that we're experiencing as appropriately as possible. From strictly the mental performance aspect of all of this, something I will say is from my own experience and from working with athletes, soldiers, whomever, not all skills that we think are going to work actually work in different scenarios. So maybe, for example, we talked a little bit about reinterpreting our physiology, or like we're experiencing fight or flight. Let's try thinking about that as, hey, this is going to help me perform rather than get in my way. Reinterpreting might not work for every single person or in every single scenario. So I think it's really important to equip ourselves with as many mental skills and tools and techniques as possible, so that we have a bunch of different tools that we can reach into our toolbox and utilize in different types of situations if one skill isn't doing the trick for us, or if one technique isn't working in some other scenario. And then the other piece is mental skills training takes a lot of freaking work. It's not something that, hey, we can learn this one skill one time, we can go out and practice it maybe 1 or 2 times, and then it's like, bam, we're good, we're mentally tough, we have composure whenever we need it. These are the types of skills, just like within the physical realm, we need to be able to practice them as deliberately and consistently as possible. So whether that's, yeah, cool, just in your sport, whether that's in practice or high pressure situations or game situations, but also taking the same exact skills and techniques and implementing them in different areas of our life. Because the more that we can use these types of skills, the more we're actually changing our brain, and our brains are getting used to using these skills in different types of scenarios. So just like what Alex was saying before with physical performance, or like walking, we're not thinking about, okay, left foot, then right foot, then left foot. The goal is with mental skills training is to practice them as deliberately and consistently as possible so that they can become automatic. And we can figure out, hey, what's the right combination of skills or techniques that I can use in this specific scenario that I know I've practiced, I know it's worked for me. And I think that unfortunately, sometimes we think that this is just like a quick fix. Okay, like I'll read an article on something, I'll practice it a few times, and we're good to go. But it takes some work. So just identifying like that's a normal thing. Like all of this it's tough stuff. And if we care about the outcome and we care about performing at our best from a mental and physical perspective, then it's worth it. It's tough, but it's worth it.
Yeah, think about like the first time that you like picked up whatever it is that you play your sport with. Like, so for me, like the first time I ever picked up a football, I was probably younger enough than I even knew what to do with a football. But then as you practice more and more and more, you get to the point where you are today. So something like this, it's exactly the same. If you're picking up these strategies for the first time, it's going to take quite a bit of time to get good at it and have it be automatic. So yeah, I think that was a really good point. Savannah asked a great question about how can we help our teammates have better self-talk. So teammates are some of our teammates seem to be like getting themselves down after they make a really simple mistake. And I'm actually very curious because I've seen this from both sides. I've been that person that, gets themselves down after a simple mistake. And I've also been that person trying to help others.
Yeah, that's so great. And again, normalizing, we all have been there. We all will continuously go to that space. So I think that's important to put out there. There's a bunch of different strategies when it comes to our own self-talk and others. I think one of the big ones that has been my go-to lately, and when it comes to coaching, more productive self-talk, is either verbalizing it or writing it down. I think there's such power in like getting what's going on in our brains out. Because if it's going on in our brains and we're not fully aware of what it is that we're actually thinking, then that pattern, that cycle can continue. And that could be, like we talked about before, that can be pretty detrimental, specific to in increasing the amount of anxiety that we're experiencing. So getting our thoughts out, whether that's talking to somebody that we trust and care about, or just, I call it brain dumping, like tossing it on a piece of paper. It doesn't have to make any sense whatsoever, but just distancing ourselves from some of that self-talk. Sometimes that does the trick, where it's like, I'm writing things down that was going on in my brain. I'm realizing that it's not actually true. It's just a thought that's happening right now. sometimes that's helpful in itself. So yeah, bouncing it off of someone else or just jotting it down, writing it down, getting it out of our head onto a piece of paper. Those are just two quick little things that I've seen be helpful for other people, especially when it comes to helping others, and reminding them of some of the strategies that could be helpful when it comes to reframing or changing the channel of what's going on in our brains.
Yes, I love both of those, and those work wonderfully. I think a couple other things too is I sometimes try and do like the role reversal of if you hear a teammate who maybe made a mistake and they're kind of like getting in their head or talking poorly about themselves, kind of asking them like, if I made that mistake, would you say the same to me? And of course they're gonna be like, oh my gosh, no. Or like, I would never say that. Well, then why are you saying that to yourself? Right? Like we tend to be our biggest critic. And sometimes you don't realize like how much we're bashing ourselves because it's automatic and we're just used to it. And I will say to some extent, that's probably helps people like, oh, I need to get better. I need to motivate myself. I can do better. But it's also at a detriment to some point. So we have to find that balance and that fine line of it's okay to have expectations. It's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to get frustrated. It's just how we respond, what we lean into. And then another thing, sometimes we like to make it a competition or challenge. So I'll encourage people like, okay, buddy up, especially when I'm working with teams. And I do this game called Rubber Band Thought. So they have a rubber band, a scrunchie, a hair tie, something on their wrist. And I have them identify one wrist as like helpful self-talk and the other wrist as unhelpful. Excuse me. And then as they're having just conversations throughout the day, if they catch their buddy saying something really negative about themselves, or like, gosh, that test was so hard, or like, oh, I sucked today at practice. It's like, oh, you got to change the rubber band to the negative or the unhelpful wrist. And then once they switch it to the negative wrist, then they have to reframe it, or they have to create something that's more productive. Like, gosh, that test was really hard, but like I did my best. Or like, yeah, I made a mistake on the field, but what can I learn from it? And then they're able to switch it over to the productive or helpful wrist. So I've done this in like workshop settings. I did this with an individual soccer player, and she was on the field, like switching things left and right. And I'm like, I didn't even know you can think that quickly, like while playing. But being able to kind of hold each other accountable, make it fun, make it challenging. And then inevitably, you're also helping your self-talk, because then you're asking people to hold you accountable of when sometimes maybe our automatic thoughts kind of slip as well. So a couple just different things to try and help support your teammates in that way.
Awesome. I think we'll probably have time for like two more questions, and I already kind of chose a couple of them that are in the chat. But again, if you have more questions after this, please continue to type them in the chat. So the first one is, how can we tell our coach that we're struggling with performance anxiety or just anxiety in general without the fear of like being benched or our play time being reduced? It's a hard one.
Such a hard thing, right? Easier said than done. Everything I'm about to say is easier said than done, because that fear, that power dynamic is real. And I'm a firm believer that it's important to communicate these things in order to label it, name it, get it out, and then know how your coaches can support you in it. Again, if I'm looking back at my own career in college, I wish I would have talked to the coach, because there were multiple times where my symptoms or my behaviors were totally mistaken for what they thought they were observing versus like me being in my own head, me being super anxious, me not knowing how to cope and deal with it. So I think, yes, though the fear is valid and it's like, oh my gosh, am I going to get benched? Are they going to look at me differently? Like that is super valid. And reminding ourselves like you're human, and anxiety, mental health, wellness is super normal. Everyone has it. And I think you being able to go to your coach and express like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, and I'm reaching out to support of like, how can you help me? How can we work on this? Like, how can I better myself on and off the court? I think those are the best, most fruitful, and most courageous conversations you can have. Otherwise, you're going to suffer in silence, and that fear is just going to continue to build up. And the misunderstanding or misconception of what you're experiencing versus what they're observing will continue to build. And I've seen that. I've been working with individuals for a very long time that still haven't talked to their coaches. And then their coaches are coming to me like, what's going on? Like, this is what I'm observing. And due to confidentiality, I can't say like, I'm working on it, or they have performance anxiety, but like encouraging the athletes to talk to their coaches and share what they feel comfortable is so important.
100%. I mean, I think just as human beings, we tend to mind read a lot, where it's like, oh, if I go to my coach, I know that they're going to bench me because I'm experiencing this, or because I even like I breathed it into the world and I said it out loud. But we don't really know until we actually have those conversations. And I can almost guarantee you that they probably have experienced that at some point in their coaching career or in their athletic career, just like their daily life. So I think naming it says a lot, like what Alex was saying. Like that takes a lot to be able to name that, especially in front of a mentor or a coach, someone that you care about and care how they view you. So in my experience, by being able to identify like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing, and I wanted to bring this to your attention because I want to grow and I want to get better, and I want you to see that I'm putting in the effort and that I am using the resources and doing all the things that I can do to make sure that this isn't going to negatively impact me for my athletic career. So maybe they might even have some strategies or some experience that they can share with you to help combat it from like their perspective, or they from just the fact that they know you as an individual and as an athlete. Maybe they might have some insight in some of that. So I would definitely recommend, like, obviously, of course, having open and honest, clear communication when it comes to this, and being aware that maybe sometimes we might be mind reading a little bit and we don't really know what's going to happen unless we actually go for it. And maybe even like pre-plan some of that conversation, like either write it out or put a little thought into it before going into that conversation. Like, hey, what is it that I want to bring to their attention? How do I want to say it? What are some of the outcomes of this conversation that I want to get, and I want my coach to get as well. So maybe doing some work ahead of time, maybe that even might help combat some of that anxiety going into that conversation in the first place. So yeah, I think that was a really good question and a really tough conversation to have, but definitely a doable one for sure.
Yeah, Emily, I was actually gonna like touch on that almost exactly. Like having that tough conversation, but knowing when to have it, how do you ask those questions? Not only like what are the words that you say, but like what is your mindset going into that conversation? And then also what you mentioned, like what are the outcomes that you want out of this, right? Explaining to your coach, like, hey, I want to get better, not only for myself, for the team, but how, like going into it with almost curiosity instead of this is what I'm dealing with, I want you to solve it for me. That's not what they're going to be able to do, right? They're going to help you work through it, but how do you have that conversation? And then also the timing, like if your coach has like an office, I was just thinking like college athletics, because I'm sure we have some high schoolers in here too, but like go into your coach's office one day and just say like, hey, do you have some time to chat? If not, like let's figure out a time that does work. um, the best time to do this is probably not when you're experiencing that performance anxiety during a practice, or especially like in between quarters or at halftime of a game, right? You're going to want to talk to them like during the normal week. That's just my personal opinion. And then lastly, do you guys have like some success stories that you can share from somebody who has been dealing with these issues in the past, and kind of like what they, I don't think accomplishments are super important, but how they overcame it, or the result that came from them like trying something new, just like some success stories, and hopefully ending on, on more of a positive note.
Yeah, so something that's coming to mind that I'm not sure if we really touched on too much is that there's a huge relationship between confidence and performance anxiety. So if you think about it, if we're experiencing this physical or mental stimulation that we're labeling as performance anxiety, usually that's coming from a place of doubt. It's, oh, I'm not sure if I can handle this or if I can be successful. And that in turn is going to start decreasing the amount of confidence that we feel. So the things that are popping into my mind is really, okay, how can I utilize the tools that I've been practicing or that I've been, you know, teasing out in different types of situations? And if I'm starting to see some success, so maybe it's okay, I'm identifying I'm experiencing fight or flight response. I'm going to start taking like these very deliberate types of deep breaths, and I'm noticing that almost instantaneously my fight or flight starting to go down. And once I start noticing that, then that also has an impact on the amount of confidence that I feel. So I think with some of the athletes that I work with, I think that's kind of like the success right there, is that they start believing in themselves. And like when I say believe, I mean truly believing that they can handle these types of situations, and that these situations or their anxiety isn't handling them, that they have some type of control over what they're experiencing and overall the output or the quality of their performance. So I think that the more, like I was talking about before, the more we can utilize these skills and see what really works for us, we're not only maintaining composure and decreasing some of this like uncomfy anxiety that we might be feeling, but we also probably are having more productive self-talk. We're probably increasing the amount of confidence that we have, or that, or our ability to focus on the present moment, or what is it that I need to do in order to be successful. So I think that's kind of like the success right there, is even though I am utilizing some skills or relaxation techniques or name your tool, to combat some of the anxiety that I'm experiencing, there's a domino effect in that too. And usually when we experience this domino effect, we feel better, whether that's within our sport or just like quality of life in general, because we feel like we have a handle on what's going on, and how we're presenting ourselves or how we're just feeling in our day-to-day life. So I think that's like the first thing that kind of popped in my brain.
Yeah, I think definitely the boost in confidence and the symptoms improving is absolutely important. I actually remembered that I have a case that I'm actually working on right now where the athlete's performance anxiety was so high and so prevalent that they actually stopped doing their sport because it just wasn't fun anymore. The amount of stress and anxiousness, they would go to games and they couldn't even get out of their car. Like they were sitting in their car watching their team play. And that was already super elevating their symptoms just being in the car. So worked with this athlete, still working with this athlete, but the success here is after, a lot of exposure therapy, a lot of understanding and exploring kind of where they're at, what they want, their goals, what's their intention. They've returned to playing sport. It's not at the same level that they were, but they do have a plan and a goal to kind of inch their way back up to it. Because we went from like, I don't even want to go on the field to, it was like, all right, like, let's just attend a practice. Like, let's see what that looks like. All right, let's just maybe go on the field. And this is obviously after weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of work. And they finally came into a session. They're like, Alex, I made a team. I'm like, wait, what? They're like, I went out, I tried out for a team, and I'm on the team. What do I do? I was like, wait, the fact that you even went and tried out for a team is amazing. So they're super excited. They're rediscovering their joy for their sport. They still get anxious, but it's not at the point where they're debilitated, where they can't even get out of the car. So I'm super proud of them, and we're continuing to work because they want to get back to that level that they were competing at. But again, the fact that they're rediscovering the joy for their sport and doing it on their own terms, like I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you. So that's been a major success.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for like answering all of this stuff. And I was taking some notes like for myself too. Okay, so one reminder for campus captains really quick. If you want to use this as like your monthly event, just make sure that you submit like your 3 takeaways as your assignment in classroom for the activity report. And then for Alex and Emily, is there anything else that you want to kind of leave them with for the night?
I would just say like you all being here, I think is awesome in like better understanding yourself and better understanding and wanting to support your teammates. I think most of the questions were like, how do I support my teammates? Which is amazing. So I appreciate you all being here. Please go and share this information now with your teammates, with your coaches, with anyone that you think would be helpful. Because honestly, these are lifelong lessons. This isn't sport specific. So being able to talk about it and decrease that stigma and increase the understanding is really, really crucial. But thank you all for taking your time because I know how busy you all are.
Yep, totally just want to second that, say ditto. Really appreciate you all being here. And just the fact that you are here shows how much you care. And that makes me happy. And I hope that you're able to gain even just one little thing that you can start implementing or that you can get a little curious about, whether it's for helping yourself or helping someone that you care about. But I think the big thing that Alex said that I want to second as well is that these aren't just sport specific techniques, or this isn't just a sport specific thing. These are strategies, these are concepts that we can take in all aspects of our life and maybe even like down the road pass down to other people, whether those are you know, if we're coaching or we have people that we're mentoring or we're leading or family members or friends. So these aren't just sport skills. I think these are life skills as well. So, but yeah, thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. If anybody has any other questions, I know Emily and Alex just put their emails in the chat, but you can also email me and I can connect you with them, whatever works easiest for you. But I'm going to stop the recording and I hope you all have a great night. Thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions, feel free to stick around. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.